Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with George Ortega. And in our last podcast, we were talking about how theology and people's belief in God, will probably change under the no free will understanding. But what we want to talk about in this one is these people who say, well, life has no meaning without free will. Like, if you're not in control of your life, well, what's the point? And I mean that the statement sounds absurd to me because you don't have to be the first causer of something to enjoy it and to find meaning in it. And so I compare it to, a movie. I didn't make the movie, but I'm enjoying it, or a puppet show. And like that one guy that said, "Hey, this is the greatest puppet show I've ever seen," you know. So yes, I find all sorts of great meaning. Hey, and like for example, hey, I watch My Little Pony. I am not the creator, the first causer or copyright holder of My Little Pony, but seriously, I enjoy that show, and it's so yeah, you can find meaning in all kinds of things without having to create it. So that sounds weird to me. What do you think?
Yeah, well, there's a kind of like a correlate to this, or just a similar kind of consideration that many people come to relate it to theism. In other words, a lot of people will say, well, if we're here for just like 80, 90, 100 years, whatever, and then there's eternity, and then we just cease to exist, we just like we didn't exist before we were born, and we're not going to exist ever again, like for the rest of eternity. People will say, like, well, if that's the case, what's the point of this life? Because it's like, it's like the blink of an eye. We're here, we're gone. What's the meaning? And so, like, I think the reason a lot of religions have survived, have been so popular among people, is that it posits that this reality, this life isn't all that there is. It posits that we have a part of us that perhaps always existed before us and will always exist after this incarnation. So basically, having said that, how can we kind of like present a similar kind of argument that basically, fine, absolutely nothing we do is up to us, and you were doing this basically because we still enjoy things, but still life can still have meaning and purpose, without our having a free will. That, we really have to, like, because I think that just as like a lot of theists, I don't think are going to give up theism because of this need, or this, it's not just a need. Like, for example, like, we're hedonic creatures, we seek pleasure and avoid pain. So for many people, many people will kind of like conclude, well, actually there's no way of knowing, like with the death thing, there's no way of really knowing whether we continue to exist or not. And given that, it kind of makes sense to believe that we continue, and actually that we go to heaven. I think that's the ideal belief, because that's the belief that creates most happiness in terms of optimism and expectation in this life. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and I get what you're saying, how that appeals to people. I just get hung up on tiny details like whether it's true or not. I just get hung up on that because what? Because trying to um prove the existence of a soul is kind of like trying to prove free will. Like it seems kind of like that to me because I understand that everything I am is made up of other particles and came from something else. So I realized, like, for me, like the self is an illusion. That the only thing that's me that will continue to exist is that life, the universe, or it will always exist, and I am a part of life. I just don't think that there will be any more, collection of things to make up what you see now.
all right, yeah, let me address the distinction between the free will question and this question of like possible immortality. I think the free will construct, as we explain over and over and over, it's incoherent. you can't have like say that like we caused something of our free will because like the causal regression behind our causing it makes free will impossible. And if you say, we have a free will it's not caused, that doesn't make sense. So in other words, like, free will very fundamentally is incoherent, indefensible,
Yeah.
illogical, but like, all right, but in terms of like an immortal soul, I don't think we can have a very similar comparison for a couple of reasons. One, for example, like we understand in physics that like the reality that we perceive, that let's say we were to look for a soul, a human soul. Well, we have to acknowledge that our technology, the best of our technology, can only detect 4% of the universe. The rest of what's out there, it's like this dark matter, dark energy. We know it's out there. It exerts a gravitational force, but we have no idea about what it is. So in a certain sense, it's kind of like positing, like, well, I've looked in 4% of a room for the soul and stuff, and I haven't found it. So again, there's a bit of a distinction between what you positing, the whether we have a free will or not, or immortality. But let's pull this back to the free will thing, because like basically, we're trying to help people, you know, understand that this life, regardless of whether we go on, beyond this or whatever, this life can have profound meaning without having a free will. So can you explain it in more detail? Just like, in other
Yeah.
terms.
Yeah, and of course, first of all, I want to address what you say. Yeah, free will is completely indefensible. It's so incoherent that at least the concept of a soul is, I suppose, one that someone can posit, unlike free will. So I see what you're saying. There's a slight difference there. But yeah, as far as us having meaning in things, we don't have to be the first cause, or we don't have to be the self chooser. And one example that a lot of people will relate to is the whole falling in love thing. Because you mentioned that before, and even though I'm certainly not an expert in falling in love, um, well, yeah, it's true. People will tell you, well, yeah, it was love at first sight. I just knew I was meant to be with this person. For a lot of people, that's how they describe it. They're just a connection with, somebody. And even I understand it, and it's kind of hard to explain. And this is kind of mysterious. People that you don't really know, but you just get this feeling there's something different about them. And I don't know what it is, if it's the subconscious thing, if it's their body language, if there's something that I can't detect. And some people talk about pheromones and stuff like that, that we're like, that subconsciously we perceive, even though consciously we don't, that attracts us to certain people. So yeah, there's unknown things there, but yeah, we don't choose who we fall in love with. We don't choose which people, become our best friends. And it's sort of like, well, that's just the chain of events, like, just like the chain of events leading to me meeting you and us getting involved in this no free will thing. So yeah, it doesn't make it any less meaningful, because if you're enjoying something already, if you're already enjoying something and like, yeah, this is awesome, this is the greatest thing ever, and then you find out that, you know, the food that you thought tasted so good, you realize you are not the first causer of this food. But did that stop anyone from enjoying good food?
Yeah, no, Chandler, bringing up love is excellent. It's ideal because basically, yeah, let me reiterate. Um, we value love. Many people value love, their relationship beyond everything, beyond everything else. Love of their mate, love of their family, love of the people who are close to them. And like, relative to love, everybody has to acknowledge that we can't freely will to love people. Hold on for a second. I'm taking a. Oh no, no, I got a call. No, no, I don't have to take that. All right. So anyway, so like we don't choose who to love, right? And we can't. And that's in other words, like this love thing is a perfect demonstration of our not having a free will. Because like if we had a free will, yes, I mean like everybody would be in love. Everybody would not be probably. If we had a free will, we wouldn't
Yeah.
be in love just with one person, probably everybody'd be in love with everyone else, and like it'd be a complete love fest on the planet, complete bliss and all. So like that should tell
We
people we
basically
don't
ruled
have a
it
free
out.
will. Now, right? So now again, again, as you were explaining, yes, we know that who we fall in love with or not is completely not up to us. People falling out of love all the time too, right? So like they don't control that either. Got this phone thing? Hold on. All right, another thing. What? Sorry. All right. So like now, here's the thing. What? Hold on. All right. Wait. I'm trying to get this. All right. Anyway, so like relative to the love thing, another thing is like, so we know that we don't have a free will. We can't fall in love. But another thing, Chandler, what I was trying to get with the stupid phone, basically we understand that babies don't have a free will, right? So
Yeah.
are we trying to tell people, or are people trying to tell us that like if babies don't have a free will, if babies just do what they do, and you can't really blame a baby for anything, like a 6 month, they're going to do what they do. So are they trying to tell us that the lives of these babies are meaningless? Because essentially that's what.
Oh, now we're getting into it big time, man. Because everybody already knows how I feel about the abortion thing. Because what they do is they're like, well, these babies aren't valuable yet. And they keep pushing it further, like, well, you're not valuable till you're born, but then they're born like, well, you're not valuable till you graduate high school or you can drive a car, and then once they reach that, well, you're not valuable till you have a PhD and you become the president or something, because people do that because they do this whole thing, and under the no free will understanding, I realized that I no more deserve credit or blame for anything now. I have no more free will now than I did as an unborn baby. And this is a very key distinction, because what this does is it brings a sense of equality between us and younger people, just as it does with people of different skin colors, religions, realizing we are at one with them. They are just like us, even though there's some differences. They are a sentient, conscious being experiencing life along with us. And it is this that I gain a love for all life, a respect, a love for all life. So even though I'm not all blissed out in love with everyone on the planet like you were talking about, not in the romantic sense anyway, I do feel like I can genuinely love people just for being what they are, being life, being the same thing as me. I feel a kinship, a friendship, and that is what, if everyone felt it, they would probably be just as pro-life. They would probably be just as caring about the unborn babies and all these animals. They'd probably go vegan, and I mean, seriously, if they had that understanding as I do, which is why I'm glad that I'm getting into it, because you have a whole chapter in your book and a whole episode of your TV show about when does a child gain this free will thing supposedly. Like, at what age do they suddenly gain a free will? Because that's weird. You realize
All
it
right.
doesn't work.
Absolutely. All right. So like we've explained how like people being in love and valuing love beyond pretty much every other aspect of their life demonstrates that and like our being love not being something we freely will, that demonstrates that like can have profound meaning, our overcoming the illusion of free will. If we consider the life of a baby, that also demonstrates that we can have profound meaning without things being up to us. And so, like a third thing, I think you were mentioning this before. Like, let's say we watch a movie, and let's say we've watched it, so we're watching it a second time, a third time, a fourth time because we really enjoy this movie. So, like with this movie, not only did we not create it, we have no say in anything that goes on in this movie, but we've also seen it before. We know how it's going to turn out. So like, and like people love movies like that. Some people will watch the same movie 10, 20 times. And so like, you can't tell me that this even vicarious, enjoyment of a movie, that a person, has no control over, has no meaning. So like, apply this to our lives. Yes, fine. Nothing is up to us, but meaning and things being up to us are in a certain sense completely they're not mutually exclusive. They're completely independent of each other.
Yeah, and what's interesting is your life can be much more enjoyable when you no longer have the guilt and blame and hatred of yourself and others that just poisons everything. Because, like Christopher Hitchens said, religion poisons everything. But you know what I think is really poisoning everything, George? I don't think it's religion in the sense of believing in a God or whatever necessarily that's poisoning everything. I really think the free will belief is poisoning everything. Now that I've learned a lot more, I'm starting to see what's poisoning everything. People are so deluded about the fundamental nature of humanity and all life, of how it really works, that everything is caused. And until they get that right, then how do you progress at establishing, whether there's an afterlife? What is the meaning of life? What is the objective standard of morality? Does a God exist? All these other things are very important philosophical topics, and they're all discussed in philosophy. There's a lot written by ancient philosophers and modern ones, but the free will one is key. I do believe it is a central part of philosophy for a reason. In a course on philosophy, if you're not covering free will, don't even bother with the course, because it gets into, you can't talk about people with any of their other things, because it all relates. Everything relates to why do people do what we do. So yeah, I mean, and I find meaning in philosophy. I find meaning in asking those bigger questions. Why are we here? What are we doing? And why do we do it?
Yeah, and all right, so like our having a not having a free will, we really have to kind of like people say, well, life is about growth, life is about becoming more, about all this. Without free will, none of that actually makes sense. So like we have to kind of like explore that. But yeah, as you're saying, that basically, we still value, we have a meaning in life, and like all right, with religion. I agree with you completely. Like religion, when it started, think about it. Religion started before there was any science, before there was any education, before there was any standardized systems of knowledge. So
Yes.
religion was basically, and it still is most fundamentally, a way to understand reality. I mean, think about it. Like before scientists explained to us that the clouds are these water molecules. We didn't know what they were. We didn't know what the stars were. We didn't know what the sun was. Now we've kind of like reduced everything to these kinds of things and all, which kind of like robs, I think, part of the mystery of reality. But essentially, we have to acknowledge that yes, it's not religion that's the problem, so much as this belief in free will. And so basically now we have to kind of like, we have to in terms like we have to ask people like, is there more meaning in our lives when we are not constantly battling with each other and in conflict, blaming each other, blaming ourselves, just full of this vengeance and revenge? Is there more meaning with this free will construct that leads to that? Or is there more meaning in our life? Would there be more meaning for the whole world to transcend, overcome this belief in free will? So now, like, whatever we're doing, whether we're trying to understand religion, trying to understand science, whatever it is, at least we're working together without being so ubiquitously just distracted by the conflict that free will belief creates.
Yeah, and another thing that I think we want to do, since we still got plenty of time left, is bring it back to the love thing. Because the whole love thing, some people try to say, and I saw this happen today on Facebook, like that if there's no free will, then there's no love. Because they say, well, love has to be chosen. It can't be programmed. God doesn't want robots. I hear this argument all the time, and I'm like, we already know we don't choose who we love anyway. We already know that. So where does this myth come that you have to freely, in some logically impossible way, choose to love God or anybody else?
Chandler, that's an excellent point because, like, we can relate, people can understand that it's not up to us with whom we fall in love. This woman that we fall in love with and marry and stuff. People know that. People understand that it's lucky, because again, like if we could fall in love of our free will, then there would be no single people, because I think most people would rather be in a relationship.
That's a
So
very
like, yeah,
good point.
so yeah, so apply that as you just did to love of God. It's the same thing. If we don't have a free will to love each other, even to love ourselves, I suppose, how are we expected to like have this free will to then love God? It's equally impossible.
Yeah, and who wouldn't love everybody? And if you think about it, especially in your pantheism view, to love God is to love everything because God's the universe. So those other people that you are hating because you believe that you have this free will thing, for example, if you believe that, then you're hating these other people while trying to use your free will to love this God, and it's not working. I've seen that it doesn't work. When people try this, like, I hate you, but I love God. Like, how does that work?
I hear you. I hear you. And all right, so in terms of explaining in more detail how, like, it's not up to us whether we love God or not. For example, there's a lot of people in the world who've never heard of God. They've never read a book about God. They've never heard the word God. So how can these people be expected to love, an entity, a being, a God that they have no knowledge of? So what I'm saying is, like, those of us who do have knowledge of God, we got it from our parents, from our society, from all these forces, these factors in life over which we had no control.
Yeah.
Whether or not we learn or hear about God, whatever, that's not up to us.
Yeah, and one of the reasons, George, since there's no free will understanding, one thing that's changed with me is I'm a lot nicer to the theist than I used to be because I was kind of like a
Good.
militant atheist, like, why are you so stupid to believe this? But once you understand that they're just like I was, that I believe in God because it was what I was taught, and I was able, the causal process led me to come out of that. But now I'm like, well, hey, it's not your fault you believe in God. It's like
Yeah,
it takes away that extra edge, that hatred, that just
and
eats away at you.
no, you're right, and you got to feel bad for a lot of theists, a lot of religionists, because like you understand, I think if you met them, that genuinely they value goodness, they want to be good, they value love, they value compassion and all. I think they really do. But like this irony is like fine, they value that, but then they've got this like completely insane, extremely hateful belief. I mean, like with I mean, not with every religion, of course, but with most religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, basically there's this belief that, my God, some people are so horrible that they deserve of their free will, because of their free will, to spend the rest of eternity, burning in hellfires and stuff. How, like, so you got to feel bad for these theists who, on
Yeah.
the one hand, really value compassion and goodness and morality, but they're then are straddled or hindered or just like corrupted with this most hateful belief in free will.
Right. And what's interesting about that is I would not oppose religion as much as I do if it weren't for the belief in hell. But it's because it's used as a threat to scare people, and people get nightmares and they are terrified. Years of their lives are wasted on the fear of hell, and that's what happened to me too. I was so scared I was going to hell. But it's sort of a weird thing, but that is the most hateful belief. And realizing that you don't deserve it is what's interesting, because you know what? Even if you are suffering, and even if other people are attributing free will to you and blaming you for something, when you have that understanding that you don't deserve the bad things you're experiencing, that's a whole lot better. It's a whole lot better than this whole thing that, oh no, I'm bad, I deserve to be punished. It's so awful, that feeling, and I know it well.
Chandler, yeah. Before working on free will back in the early 2000s, I did a lot of research and a TV show on happiness. And one of the things I learned, that there's four personality traits most correlated to happiness. One of them is self-esteem. Okay, the other is, one of them is optimism, extroversion, locus of control, whatever. But anyway, with self-esteem, that's very tied in to how we judge ourselves. In other words, like, if we're like blaming ourselves for the wrong we do, that's going to erode our self-esteem, which is going to erode our happiness. And like, for people who don't know, happiness, as Aristotle explained, is our fundamental drive. That's what everything else is about. Aristotle said like happiness is the only goal in life, only ends. Everything else is a means. So self-esteem again, like to the extent that free will belief erodes our self-esteem and leads us to wrongly, mistakenly believe we're immoral, and deserving of such horrible punishment, that's going to impinge on our happiness.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm a lot happier than I was, that's for sure. I mean, that's what's so amazing about it is that your show on free will is just so awesome. And it's so interesting because another thing that's a very big thing is that a free will believer cannot oppose abortion. Not really. This is really scary. A lot of people are not going to like this inconvenient truth, George. But if you just keep calling people a sinner or a slut and telling them that they're bad and they deserve hell because they chose to kill their child, all it does is gets them to feel bad. They don't like it. They go into not denial. It actually hurts the pro-life movement more than anything I ever seen when they get all judgmental up to people and they just make them feel worse and worse. So then these people try to justify that they did the right thing, and then it turns really bad. So that's what I've noticed is that doesn't work. But if you believe in free will, that's what you're stuck in the cycle of doing. You're stuck in the cycle of blaming people. You blame people for having abortions. You blame people for having sex. You do that. Like I used to do that. I was blaming people, and it was awful because it's not a very effective thing. It's just not the way to make friends and influence people. It's just not.
Yeah, well, Chandler, you bring up an excellent point. Let me reiterate. In other words, like people who want to eliminate abortion, what the world is telling people in a certain what people understand is that like abortion is kind of like they get that on a certain level that they're basically essentially killing an unborn child, right? And like if they understand that and they also believe in free will, then they are blaming themselves for that horrible act. And so like and that's what causes them to go into denial, to say, well, maybe the child isn't really a child before it's born, or maybe some kind of the kind of nonsensical excuses that we hear and all. So like
Yeah.
yes, to the extent we overcome free will belief, then people can they don't have to go into denial about it. They say like let's say they're considering whether to have an abortion or not. It's no longer about any kind of guilt that they would be feeling that would prevent them from looking at what they're doing. They'd be able to see what they're actually doing with a clearer lens.
Well, you know what, George? I think in this podcast we have just explained at a deeper level than I even wrote in my book, about the connection between a denial of the immorality of abortion and this belief in free will. I really do believe that the belief in free will is causing people to go into denial about abortion, just like it is climate change or the suffering of these non-human animals. Because people go into denial when you attack how they feel about themselves. And if you make them feel like a bad person because they did something bad, well, then they get defensive and they go into denial. But if you make them understand that, yes, they did something bad, but they didn't know better at the time. You're not blaming them in any sense that they're like some first causer who all by themselves chose to do something. And this really helps. This really helps because I no longer have any hatred to people who do things that I consider totally immoral. And the thing is, we're not justifying these things. We're not saying that these things are right. In fact, we're saying this is bad and we're going to help other people see that this is bad, but not make them feel fundamentally responsible because that actually just causes them to go into denial and get more illogical and do more bad things.
Chandler, it's excellent.
It's very excellent. Yeah, we're almost at our 30-minute mark. And so I guess we should end this one soon. Would you like to do the closing?
Well, again, like meaning, we've just demonstrated that life can have not just as much meaning, but perhaps more meaning. For example, we're not doing our will without free will. We're doing the will of the universe or God. So basically, transcending free will belief creates a world with more meaning. How's
Yes,
that?
certainly does. All right.